Hello, this is Socially Triggered, and this video is going to be my third video on George Floyd. The reason I'm making this third video is I really want to clarify the falsehoods that are being spread about the case. One falsehood that's being spread is that George Floyd didn't resist arrest, and that's actually just totally false. Even eyewitnesses, when it was first reported, had said that he was obviously resisting arrest, and that he was going to be compliant now and should get into the car. Um, Another thing that most people don't understand is why were two cops required to hold Floyd down? Well, George Floyd is a very big man. He was 6'4", according to the coroner's report, and he was resisting arrest. So if you have such a big man, it actually takes a fair amount of effort to keep him under control. And one other thing that I'd like to clarify is in my first video about George Floyd, I thought that it was murder. And the reasons I gave were based on the original video. I wondered why was George Floyd being pinned for so long. It was like 8 minutes, that he was being pinned, almost 9 minutes. And 2 of those minutes he was unconscious. And I thought that, this is a very dangerous thing to do, especially the way he was being pinned with the knee to the neck. And I thought there was some negligence in performing that kind of action. Afterwards, I looked further into the research and I read the police handbook. And the police handbook states that this form of control over an arresting person is completely legitimate. Actually, there was since this video has been released of George Floyd, there's actually been many cases where they've shown that the same technique, I should say, has been used against other people, white, black, everybody. Actually, there was a white man who also died of the same technique a few weeks prior to George Floyd's death. And the cops in that case were exonerated. And it didn't get the media attention because it was a white man, so nobody cares. But in the case of George Floyd, people care because it's a black person, white cop, black person. Well, that's considered racist for some reason. Even though if you watch the video, there's no signs of any overt signs of racism. I really find that the whole concept of calling this a racist act is very senseless. But one thing that really bothers me about this whole case is the right wing internet people. I was watching Atheism is Unstoppable. I was watching Louder with Crowder and a whole bunch of these right wing. Actually, AIU is not necessarily right wing, but but there's people who are usually more responsible in terms of the type of reporting that they do, and actually fairly good about giving accurate assessments of things. They all jump to the conclusion that this cop should go to jail and that he is guilty and that what he did was an act of violence against. Sticks, X, and Hammer is another one that said, oh, this cop must have had a bad day and was just taking it out on some person. And I'm just disappointed by all these people that I normally trust. And I think I was the only one that reported it correctly, where I was saying the issue wasn't with the police themselves, it was with the police handbook. Now, according to the handbook, you're allowed to pin the person down the way George Floyd was pinned down. And what, according to the handbook, you're supposed to sort of be attentive and make sure that he's healthy and nothing going wrong. But they're not doctors. They can only do that to a certain extent. They had him on his side, which is the right way to hold him down, so that he's not like face down and unable to breathe. Um, and they had him in such a way that, according to the technique, should have just had him controlled. Now, since the video, there's been an autopsy. And really what I want to get to in this video is to look at the autopsy. Because once you read the autopsy, the whole story changes. Everything changes about this story. And I hope you've been watching up to this point in my video, because this is the important part. This is the autopsy changes the whole story. So up till now, the story has always been these evil cops killed a poor black man. And they try to put racism in there as well. Nobody on the right infers racism, but they do infer that the cops did something really, really bad. But according to the handbook, and I really do believe, as I said in my first video, that it's the handbook that needs to be modified, because it is causing problems. And it's not going to just cause problems with black people. It's causing problems with anyone that's getting arrested, because the technique can be dangerous if it's not done correctly. So the question is, did this cop do the technique in such a way that it was dangerous? And that's really what we need to know. To the untrained eye, it looks very sad, scary situation. This guy's being pinned down. He's begging, that he's, can't breathe. He's having all these issues. And we feel like, oh, this is horrible. This is horrible. And what we don't know is what cops actually experience and how they are supposed to deal with these kinds of situations. So the cops actually called for emergency assistance from medical people. They called it and basically held him down while they waited for medical assistance to arrive. And that is, again, according to what you're supposed to do in the medical handbook. Not the medical handbook, the police handbook. And so they did actually follow the rules to the T, actually. So let me read the autopsy report, and it'll clarify even further what actually happened. So I'm just going to switch my screen here a bit. So this is the autopsy here. And it's, it says he was a 46-year-old man. He was unresponsive while being restrained by law officers. He received emergency medical care in the field and subsequently in Hennepin Healthcare Emergency Department, but could not be resuscitated. Okay, so he had some blunt force injuries, and we could see this in the video that he had suffered a little bit of injuries when he had fallen. Actually, there's a second video where it looks like he had fallen to the ground on his own accord. And then they looked at natural diseases. He had some heart disease, and he had hypertensive heart disease. Okay, and let's keep on going. No life-threatening injuries identified. Now this is really important. No life-threatening injuries identified. That means that the cops didn't do anything which led to his death or caused his death. So it was not, not a blow to the head or damage from the knee to the neck. None of that. So no facial or damage, no injuries to the muscles or the neck, no scalp, soft tissue, skull or brain injuries, no chest wall, soft tissue injuries, no rib fractures. So basically everything that you would expect. Like, so if you want to make the narrative that the cop by placing his knee on his neck, or the other cop by putting his weight on the back of George Floyd, had caused the death. Well, the autopsy says the opposite. There is no injuries there. There is nothing that suggested anything that the hold itself had caused damage to George Floyd. So in terms of this, it looks like the cops didn't do anything wrong. Now let's keep on going. Now let's find out what maybe caused the death of George Floyd. So we look blood, drug, and novel psychoactive substances screens. Okay, so this is where they look at what's inside the blood of George Floyd. And if you read, you'll see it's fentanyl, 11 ng to ml. Okay, a nanogram. I think that's nanograms to milliliters. And then they have norphenol, and that's another 5.6 nanograms for milliliters. And then we have meth. So he's got like all these drugs in him. Now, if you look at the numbers, that's actually a very high level of fentanyl. I mean, that is lethal amounts of fentanyl. I think that would kill, like, I think the normal dosage of fentanyl is about a third of that. That's considered lethal. So he's got 3 times the lethal dosage of fentanyl in his system. So probably what killed him is not the knee to the neck, not the stress of the cops putting pressure on him or anything like that. It wasn't the arrest. It was the drugs in his system. This man was going to die regardless of this situation or not. He had lethal doses of drugs in him. He was lucky to be even alive. And then they so basically this is it's all signed. Oh, he also tested positive for COVID, by the way. So this might be another one of those coronavirus deaths, because he does test positive for coronavirus. So I thought that was kind of funny. But yeah, so, and then it just goes on, looks at his personal effects, medical intervention, what happened there, evidence of injury. They did say that there were injuries, but nothing that led to his death, just injuries from, the arrest procedure. And they look at his head and neck. So they looked at the muscles and they could see no areas of intrusion or hemorrhage. So that's very important. And they looked at his lungs. And it looks like what happened is that he died from drug overdose. So this is what happens when people jump to conclusions that they make the assumption that if it's a white cop, black man, and somebody dies and the black man dies, that it must be racism. That's the assumption that is constantly being made. And really, there's nothing in this case that suggests racism. And there's nothing that actually suggests even that the cops were in the wrong. However, we got a really weird situation now. The media has hyped it up as a racist crusade, and Black Lives Matter, Antifa, all these groups, are rioting and protesting about it. And all the governments around the world are like, oh, we gotta fight some systemic racism and all this kind of stuff. And you got everybody kind of dogpiling this story, and nobody is going to be willing to tell the truth anymore because they have so much invested into this big lie that George Floyd was this innocent little angel that was killed by the evil racist cops. And that's the narrative that everybody wants to support. But so, what does that mean? What will be the result of this? There's only 2 outcomes that I can see. One is justice, that the cops will face their day in court, and the court will go through the autopsy. It'll go through the video. It'll go through the cam video that they had on the police officers as well, and it will see that the cops were probably innocent and shouldn't be charged, and they will be exonerated. Okay, that's one option. The second option is justice won't be served, and what will end up happening is the men will go to jail, probably for second-degree murder. It doesn't matter if they did it or not, but an example will be made of them. And the narrative will go on that George Floyd was a hero, and he was somebody that we should all emulate, and that he is a great guy that just was killed in his prime by these evil cops. And that is the narrative I think will end up happening. I worry that justice won't be given to this case. And the other big problem that I see is really this police handbook. If somebody just would take a look at the police handbook and fix the passages that relate to how police detain criminals, probably a lot of these problems would be resolved, because so many cases police do this procedure, this technique, and people die. And it's not going to get resolved until people look at the handbook. So rather than looking at racism and all these other things that aren't really important, let's look at what's really happening and fix that. So I hope that this video clarifies the situation, that George Floyd didn't die because of the pressure to the neck. He didn't die because of racism. He didn't die because of COVID, even though he had it. He died because of a drug overdose. He was not a good boy. He was a criminal, and he was a drug addict, and he caused his own death. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Please give me your feedback below. I know the original video was very emotional, that people watched, of George Floyd being pinned to the ground. But try to look past the emotion and try to think about this logically. What is the best that we can do in terms of justice? And the justice is looking at the facts of the case and looking at what really caused his death. And it wasn't racism, and it wasn't the knee to the neck. So we got to break that false narrative down. So again, thanks for watching. Please check out my other videos, and bye for now.